Welcome to FanFic Nation, where worlds collide, heroes rise against fate, and what if shapes legends. From epic wars to forgotten paths, this is the nation of fan made stories. Subscribe and step beyond the canon. This novel is written by JD 787. Suppressing the frustration welling in her chest, Marjorie forced a smile. Let's not dwell on such trivial matters, Lord Aegor, she said smoothly. All the princes of the so-called Alliance of the Righteous have been captured. Since His Grace ordered you to accompany the army, I assume he has no intention of executing them. I wonder what fate awaits them. Though she seemed to be asking Aegor, the question was truly directed at Baristan. She wasn't particularly interested in the answer, but after having been questioned herself, her instincts demanded she return the exchange, never give something for nothing. Even seemingly insignificant information could prove useful someday, or so her grandmother had taught her. The main ringleaders will of course face judgment, Barristan answered. As for the lesser lords who led their men in rebellion, they will be sent to take the black. The old knight saw no need to conceal this information. Aegor, as a Night's Watch officer, would know soon enough, and Lady Tyrell would hear of it before long. As for the castles taken during the conflict, they will be returned to their original lords so long as they acknowledge the treason of their family heads and offer hostages as proof of loyalty. Naturally, their lands will be greatly reduced. The holdings granted to Sir Brendan and the other loyalists today, those all came from the traitors. Rebellion for given such a thing would have been unthinkable in the old empires. But in Westeros, such leniency was considered the most practical course of action. It was a land where honor still held weight and pragmatic mercy often won out over blind vengeance. The decision to spare the rebels had many factors behind it. First was Littlefinger's escape. His flight was as good as an admission of guilt, confirming the whispers of conspiracy. The so-called Alliance of the Righteous, which had once seemed a noble cause, now found itself receiving unexpected sympathy from various quarters. Second, the idea of exterminating entire noble families simply wasn't viable in the feudal structure of Westeros. The Deer, Wolf and Osprey alliance had been forged decades ago, and over time the noble houses of the Vale had intermarried with those of the North, the Riverlands and even the Stormlands. If punishments were carried out too harshly, the bloodshed wouldn't stop until half the realm's nobility was wiped out. These were the justifications Aegor might give if asked. But the real reason for Robert's mercy was far simpler. Many of these families had once fought for him in the war against the Targaryens. And Robert Baratheon was not a man who forgot those who had helped him claim his throne. A loud crash echoed from within the great tent, the sound of plates or cups shattering. Whether it was a sign of celebration growing too wild or the beginnings of an altercation, it was unclear. Barristan frowned. Though Robert had other Kingsguard present, he was still uneasy. He lifted his jug, downed the last of his wine, and exhaled. His task complete, the old knight gave Aegor and Marjorie a nod before turning toward the tent, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Now only two remained, a man and a woman. But there was no romantic atmosphere between them. Marjorie Tyrell was many things, but she had no intention of wasting her time trying to melt the cold demeanor of a night's watchman. She had other concerns, and the night had drained her more than she cared to admit. The chief logistics officer must be busy, she said lightly. I won't keep you any longer. She turned to leave, then paused briefly. I will remain in King's Landing for a few days before returning to Highgarden. Perhaps I shall visit your office then and see this legendary Night's Watch industry for myself. Aegor exhaled subtly, relieved that their conversation had reached its natural conclusion. I look forward to your visit, my lady. Marjorie lifted her head, turned on her heel, and walked away without looking back. Her movements were graceful, composed, almost indifferent. But inside, her thoughts were in complete disarray. She had once aimed for the crown, yet now she couldn't even secure a ducal marriage. Jaime Lannister, bound by his Kingsguard vows, was not an option. The young Lord Arryn was sickly and unlikely to live long. Renly Baratheon, well, Loras had already secured that alliance, making her own involvement unnecessary. What was left? Would she be reduced to climbing into Admiral Tully's bed? Was that all she had left to offer her family? Her grandmother had always taught her that seduction was the ultimate weapon, one used with great precision and only when absolutely necessary. After all, it had been Olena's skill in such matters that had once secured her place within House Tyrell. But for Marjorie to resort to such measures now with Edmure of all men, it was a risk. What if he rejected her out of pride or spite for past slights? She would lose not just her dignity but any remaining leverage she had. For the favoured daughter of House Tyrell, the darling of Highgarden, to find herself unwanted, it was an unbearable humiliation. Beneath the flickering firelight, unseen in the night, unshed tears welled in her eyes. She quickened her pace and disappeared from Aegor's sight. The chaos sparked by a single, reckless rumor had finally settled after nearly 2 months of upheaval. Aegor had always understood the power of words, but never had he witnessed firsthand how mere whispers could set entire armies in motion. Yet in the end, rumors, no matter how fierce, were but paper tigers. Their greatest strength lay in their spread, in the uncertainty they sowed. Once a rumor became fact, it lost its edge, deflating like a punctured wineskin. For all their danger, rumors were nothing compared to the brutal certainty of war. The morning after the feast, the great host of 80,000 men dispersed like scattered crows. Each lord and knight returned to his own lands, his own family, his own hearth. Only a token force remained, some thousand men under Robert's banner, along with the last loyal knights of the Vale camped at the foot of the Eyrie. Their task was simple: wait. Either Liza Arryn would come down willingly, or hunger and fear would drive her from her mountain stronghold. After all, the king had summoned the banners of 6 kingdoms to crush a rebellious vassal. Even if she had no intention of defying the crown further, she had to present herself before the king to kneel, to beg forgiveness, to swear her loyalty anew. More than that, John Arryn had been hand of the king for over a decade. Countless nobles had tied their fates to his, and now his wife had poisoned him for the sake of an affair. Robert might be willing to let the matter slide, but others would not be so forgiving. As for the rebel lords, of the leaders of the Alliance of the Just, only Lady Anya Waynwood had been spared execution, imprisoned instead in the Red Keep, if only because she was a woman. The others, no ransoms, no pardons, they would take the black. With so many noblemen marching for the wall, Lord Commander Mormont's struggle for manpower would be eased, at least for a time. Aegor left the matter to Yoren. With Robert assigning an escort, the new recruits would reach Castle Black without incident. The rebellion had been costly, and countless small matters still needed resolution, but those were no concern of the Night's Watch. A day after the banquet, Aegor and his squire departed the Vale, travelling alongside the lords and soldiers returning home. Once more they passed through the battle-worn Bloody Gate, now under repair, and left the highlands behind. After several days of travel, they arrived once more at the heart of the realm, the capital of the 7 kingdoms, the city that never truly slept. King's Landing. The streets were as loud, filthy, and teeming with life as ever. Aegor walked the familiar path through the crowded avenues until, at last, he reached the doorway of the institution he had built with his own hands. The Night's Watch office. The office still looked the same as it had 2 months ago, but there were noticeable differences. The golden sign Aegor had personally ordered still hung high above the gate, yet outside several strange billboard-like structures had been erected. Dismounting, Aegor stepped forward and touched one. Paper. He examined the contents: conscription notices, recruitment postings, bonds, and investment instructions. Everything was there. It seemed his orders before leaving had been carried out well. These notices were originally meant to be posted on the wall, but now the office staff had built wooden stands to display them by the roadside. A bold innovation and an effective one. This had to be Tyrion's idea again. The man was truly a business genius, though his last name was a burden. Aegor couldn't help but smile, feeling at ease, and walked into the office with Casey. It was an odd feeling. Aegor didn't recognize anyone in his own shop. The men in black vests were likely employees. The two stationed at the door seemed to be guards, while a young man with a refined air sat behind the reception desk, speaking fluently with a man who looked like a potential client. Listening in, Aegor realized the man was applying to be an industrial security guard for Night's Watch Industries. The receptionist was explaining the benefits and responsibilities of the position in detail. Things had truly changed. If the new notices and the presence of a lobby manager were small surprises, what came next truly stunned him. Three people were waiting in line on the benches along either side of the room. Back when Aegor ran this office, it was common to go days without a single visitor. Was it because he was too intimidating, scaring people away? Of course not. Without his persistence and tireless efforts, this office wouldn't even exist, let alone flourish as it had. With a quiet sigh, Aegor strode toward the door leading to the inner chamber. What do you think you are doing? Do you have an appointment? The receptionist, who had been explaining the job details moments ago, abruptly stopped talking, stood up, and blocked his path. He was about to summon the guards at the door when he hesitated. His gaze fell on Igor's well-tailored black suit, an unmistakable mark of wealth and status. He froze, stunned for a few seconds, unable to finish his sentence. Aegor was about to introduce himself when Casey, his ever-keen companion, sensed an opportunity to make an entrance. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and snapped, "How dare you? This is the Chief Logistics Officer. He needs an appointment to enter his own office." Aegor found the situation amusing. He never expected to experience the classic scenario of an employee failing to recognize their own boss. He studied the receptionist, curious whether the man truly had no idea who he was or if he was merely trying to assert his authority. After all, Aegor was far better known in the rebel army camp than in King's Landing, and he had been gone for 2 months. He could hardly blame them. Through sheer determination and the fortune of meeting the right people, Aegor, once an unlucky transmigrator and a brother of the Night's Watch, had clawed his way to his current position. Although these employees had been recruited by Tyrion, they were still his first real subordinates, his own power base. He had no intention of humiliating them for their mistake. Raising a hand to calm the indignant Casey, Aegor gave the receptionist a reassuring smile. "It's fine, you worked hard. Carry on." With that, he pushed open the door and stepped inside, unconcerned with the man's reaction. The door had changed as well. Once a simple wooden slab, it was now much thicker, likely for better soundproofing. Because of that, the people inside hadn't heard the brief commotion outside. Aegor expected to find Tyrion or another one of his personally recruited staff inside, but as he entered, he was met with an unexpected sight. A young woman sat behind the desk. Who was she? Could she be Tyrion's new mistress? This was the inner chamber of the Night's Watch office, the very place where Tyrion and he once conducted their business dealings. Even if she was a partner, it was rather bold to sit in his chair. Igor frowned, displeased. But before he could say anything, he noticed the woman's posture, her head lowered, as she scribbled something on parchment. Without looking up, she spoke in a brisk professional tone. "Contract signing, bond purchase, investment negotiations, or are you here for a loan or joint venture application?" So she's not just some outsider. Aegor relaxed. She had clearly rehearsed that line countless times, delivering it smoothly and with confidence. He also found her voice vaguely familiar, though he couldn't immediately place it. Then, as if sensing something off, the woman finally looked up. "Master Aegor." She shot to her feet so quickly that the desk nearly shook, almost toppling an ink bottle in the process. Luckily, she caught it in time. Her reaction was no less startled than the receptionist. Why are you back?" It was Nina. She had swapped her work clothes from the paper mill for a sleek black outfit, looking every bit the part of an office worker. No wonder he hadn't recognized her at first. But why was she here? She should have been overseeing production and technical improvements at the paper mill. What was she doing working in his office instead? Of course, outright asking her that might make it seem as if he disapproved of her presence. Concealing his initial confusion, Aegor stepped forward with a smile. I'm back. So what? Why are you back? No, I mean. Nina's face flushed at Aegor's teasing. Seeing him approach the table, she quickly pushed back her chair, making space for him. I mean, if you wanted to return, you could have let us know in advance so we could go and greet you. Let them know in advance, and how exactly was I supposed to do that? To Nina and the others at the Night's Watch office I might be someone important, but to the king's army and the noble lords who had gathered to suppress the rebellion, what was I? Before returning, was I supposed to ask Robert to lend me a raven to send word to King's Landing, then have Maester Pycelle dispatch someone to notify the office to prepare for my arrival? You think too highly of me, Aegor said with a chuckle, shaking his head. I may not mind the trouble, but I'd rather not cause it for others. There was no need to explain further. Flaunting himself before his admiring subordinates would have been foolish. Stepping up to the large desk, Aegor immediately noticed that his chair had also been replaced. It now had a high backrest, wide armrest, a soft cushion, and was covered in velvet. Apart from lacking wheels and the ability to swivel, it was practically the prototype of a proper lord's chair. Damn chair, this thing. It must be comfortable. Since it was his seat to begin with, there was no reason for hesitation. Aegor sat down without a second thought, leaned back, and let himself sink into the plush cushion. Who bought this chair? Yes, my lord. Lord Tyrion ordered me to purchase it. Not bad, far more comfortable than that hard one I had before. The cushion still retained Nina's warmth, and a faint fragrance lingered in the air. They say that once a man's basic needs are met, his thoughts inevitably turn to other desires, and Igor was certainly well beyond mere survival. Looking up at Nina, he quickly realized why he hadn't recognized her at first. She hadn't just changed her clothes, she had done her hair and put on makeup as well. Aegor wasn't well versed in such things, but he could tell she was wearing lipstick. How was it that something as simple as lipstick could make such a difference? Well, from a biological standpoint, red lips were often a sign of good health and nutrition. Their fullness and shine reflected the skin's hydration and elasticity, a natural indicator of youth and from an evolutionary perspective, a subconscious signal of fertility. Stop. Stop. She is merely the acting representative of the Night's Watch office, presenting herself well for the sake of the organization. She put on lipstick, that's all. Why overthink it? Snapping himself out of his thoughts, Aegor suddenly realized he had been staring at Nina's lips for far too long. The girl was clearly flustered, her face now redder than the color on her lips. I'll fetch you some water, my lord, she stammered. Without waiting for his response, she hurried off, nearly stumbling in her haste to escape. Watching her retreating figure, Aegor sighed. Lipstick truly was a woman's best weapon. A simple touch of color had transformed Nina's once plain, unremarkable features into something striking. The black, form-fitting dress made her skin appear even fairer, while her red lips added a vivid contrast. The combination of black and red was like the final flourish on a painting, turning her from an ordinary girl into something almost captivating. A man who seeks greatness must take care of his brothers, whether they are his subordinates or other parts of himself. Letting out a long breath, Aegor pushed aside his distractions. Abstaining for a year and a half, perhaps that had been too long. Some things needed to be dealt with before they became a problem. When Nina returned, carrying a cup of water, the flush on her face had yet to fade, but she seemed more composed. Taking a seat in an ordinary chair beside the desk, she said, Thank you for your hard work, my lord. Was your journey smooth? The road was good and the weather was clear. It couldn't have been smoother, Aegor replied, taking a sip of water. He smiled at her, keeping his gaze as steady as possible. This time, we've truly returned with a full haul. A full haul? Nina looked around in confusion. Even Casey was empty-handed. Where are your things, my lord? Should I arrange for someone to bring them in? Aegor laughed, waving a hand dismissively. No need. I'm already here. I'll explain it all in detail later. For now, tell me what's been happening at the office these past 2 months. What happened? This. Where should I start? Nina grew flustered again, hesitating for a long moment before saying, "Let me think about it. Where is the sharp and capable woman who just asked me? Contract signing, bond purchase, investment negotiation, loan application, or joint venture. How does she even handle customers if she's like this?" Aegor was slightly concerned, but vaguely understood perhaps it was his presence that made her nervous. Still, was speaking to him really so terrifying? Not wanting to embarrass her further, the Night's Watch officer took the initiative. "Forget it. I'll ask and you just answer. When did you take over here?" "A few days after you left. Lord Tyrion stayed with me for over a month, teaching me everything. He only left after I had learned enough. I've been in charge for less than half a month." "Hmm. You were working on something when I arrived. We were calculating the accounts, tracking the income and expenses of the various factories under Night's Watch Industries, as well as the salaries for the logistics and security departments." "All the factories?" Igor raised a brow. "How many do we have now? And how many men has the security department recruited?" "The second factory is still under construction. The investment came from that merchant who bought grain and fodder from you before you left. He finally paid the penalty he owed. As for the security department, we've recruited nearly 100 men. Per your orders, we only take locals under 30, with good reputations and clean family backgrounds." Nina hesitated, raising a hand as if to scratch her head, but lowering it again, afraid of ruining her hair. "Each factory has someone responsible for its accounts, and I review the final reports. It seems like a lot, but it's not too difficult. The hardest part is processing startup loan applications. Lord Tyrion insists that every applicant submit a detailed business plan and cost estimate down to the last silver stag. I evaluate the risks and potential profits, then pass my recommendations to him for final approval." "What loans?" Aegor sat up straight. He had been asking casually. He wasn't expecting news more shocking than the last. He had vaguely noticed the word loan when he first walked in, but after his long journey he hadn't given it much thought. Now the realization hit him, his eyes widened. You mean we are lending money now? Do we even have that much spare capital?" "No, not yet." Nina quickly waved her hands, startled by his reaction. "Right now, our funds are just enough to keep things running, with little to spare. But Lord Tyrion analyzed our net profit and said we'll have surplus funds by next month. He said we can't let gold sit in a vault and rot. We need to put it to work." So he started a small business loan program specifically for people like me and my brother, those with good ideas and inventions, but no money to bring them to life. Aegor took a deep breath. This wasn't part of his plan. He had only mentioned the idea of lending as an example. He never expected Tyrion to actually implement it. That little imp was proving to be far more competent than Robert. Straightening up, Igor grabbed the stack of loan applications from the table and began flipping through them. The applications varied widely. Some sought loans to open snack stalls or clothing shops, while others wanted to follow the latest trend and open bookstores. These were unremarkable. What caught his attention was the pile of proposals for new inventions and ideas. Literacy was rare in this era, and even fewer people could describe things clearly and concisely. Igor skimmed through the first application and found a description of solid soap. In this world, soaps and detergents were usually powders or paste. This applicant proposed a method to harden the mixture into solid bars and add herbs or scented oils, creating a product that would not only clean but also leave behind a pleasant fragrance, perhaps even remove invisible dirt from the body. Soap, medicated soap. The people of Westeros had no concept of germs, but even without that knowledge, this was an advanced idea. The next application had a similar theme, an improvement on lipstick. The applicant suggested replacing toxic mineral-based dyes with natural pigments derived from fruits, vegetables, and insects. He had also developed a method to solidify the mixture using wax and oils, creating a more stable and safer product. Aegor paused. He pulled the first application closer and compared the handwriting. The same person. Lifting his gaze, Aegor studied the young woman in front of him and made a bold guess. Nina, where did you get that lipstick? It's a sample from this applicant, she admitted, blinking at him innocently. I only wanted to test it. It's still in the drawer. I didn't take it home. Why are you panicking? I didn't say you couldn't use it, Aegor chuckled. You look quite fetching, but don't overdo it. Just because the inventor claims it's non-toxic doesn't mean it's harmless. Try not to eat it. Yes, my lord. Approve both of these immediately. Tell Tyrion this venture will definitely be profitable. As for the fund, we won't have to wait 2 months. Money will be available soon. Using the conversation as an excuse, Aegor openly admired how Nina looked with makeup before turning his attention back to the stack of proposals. Do we have a system in place for this? Yes. Lord Tyrion divided the loans into three categories, each with different terms depending on the specifics. I can summarize them for you. After a few minutes of casual conversation, Nina gradually relaxed. The initial awkwardness of suddenly facing her boss and idol without warning had faded. The redness in her cheeks subsided and her composure returned. With her clear and structured explanations, Igor quickly gained a thorough understanding of the recent changes within Night's Watch Industries. The first factory was already in full operation, something Igor was well aware of. With continuous improvements in technology, the cost of paper making had been further reduced, now less than half of what it had originally been. Paper itself was cheap, but its status as a luxury item in the minds of the people had yet to change. Since there were no competitors in the market and the price of orders remained high, the business had yielded staggering profits several 100% in a short span of time. Last month, for the first time, all three production lines ran uninterrupted for an entire moon's turn, bringing in over 400 gold for Night's Watch Industries. However, as much of the cost had only just been recouped, it was difficult to determine the exact net profit. The Night's Watch bonds had also moved past their initial challenges. After enduring the trial of a large-scale redemption, their reliability had been proven. That reliability, the real money returns spread by word of mouth, and with active buyers emerging, Tyrion had decisively announced a reduction in the rate of return both to maintain a stable capital flow and to emphasize the higher profits of investment and cooperative ventures. Authors note, this chapter shows how power quietly changes hands when swords are sheathed. While nobles argue over honor and mercy, true influence grows in offices, contracts, and ideas. In Westeros, the future is no longer forged only on battlefields, but written on paper.
By the time Lord Buckwell departed for King's Landing, the first major investment, amounting to several thousand gold dragons, had already been secured. As for the loans, Tyrion had divided them into three categories. The first were short-term small loans, sums under 5 gold dragons, granted with minimal requirements to any citizen of King's Landing who could provide proof of identity and residence. Outsiders, for now, were excluded. The second were standard business loans, issued for shop openings. These required either collateral or a guarantor and carried appropriate interest rates. The third category, however, was venture capital for new inventions and innovations, which, strictly speaking, was not a loan at all. Under this system, if an application was reviewed and approved, Night's Watch Industries would directly purchase the rights to the invention. All research, development, marketing, and expansion costs would be covered by the company. In return, the inventors or creators were required to disclose everything, formulas, principles, and production methods, without withholding any information from the company's designated project leader. As compensation, the inventor would permanently receive half of the net income from the first workshop and storefront related to their invention. In other words, the ownership of the invention itself would belong to the Night's Watch, while the creator could only enjoy a share of the profits. Why did this arrangement seem so familiar? Aegor was momentarily dumbfounded. Before he had traveled to this world, wasn't this exactly how modern creative industries operated? Studios and publishing platforms owned the rights to a creator's work, while the creators themselves could only take a cut of the revenue. For inventors and craftsmen, there were only two choices. They could keep their ideas forever locked away, hidden in their homes, or even buried with them in their graves. Or they could bring them forward, hand them over to the Night's Watch, and allow Aegor and Tyrion to feast on the meat while they settled for drinking the broth. It seemed unfair, perhaps, but these were the rules set by those who controlled the resources, in short, capitalists. If they didn't like it, they didn't have to participate. And if they did participate, they had no right to complain. After all, without the possibility of enormous returns, what noble or merchant would be willing to make such a risky investment, one that could just as easily end in ruin? Beyond these financial changes, there were countless other developments that couldn't be easily summed up in words. At this moment, Aegor felt like a man playing a strategy game with his friends, only to disconnect at the very start, then finally reconnect, only to find that his team had already stormed the enemy's stronghold. He had been gone from King's Landing for 2 moons, nearly 60 days of being away, and yet the rapid expansion of Night's Watch Industries had outpaced even his wildest expectations. Fortunately, his trip to the Vale had not been for nothing. Otherwise, how could he still have the face to stand before Tyrion claiming to be the man in charge of the Night's Watch's affairs? Get ready, we're going to the factory for an inspection. Nina looked startled. Right now? Yes. Aegor had drawn in plenty of business while in the coalition army camp. Marguerite and the other nobles from the 6 kingdoms who had promised to visit the office for investment discussions could arrive at any moment. If they requested a tour of the industrial park, it would be embarrassing if he, as the head of the operation, was unfamiliar with its current state. Even he was shocked by how rapidly the factory had grown. Never go into battle unprepared. Aegor liked having everything under control. I understand right away. Nina stood up promptly, walked over to the door leading to the backyard and pushed it open. Lady Arya, Lord Aegor has returned. What? Arya's in the backyard. No one had mentioned she was here. Did that mean she had been coming every day while he was gone? As the newly replaced door swung open, the sounds of laughter and the clashing of wood rang out from the yard, followed by an excited shriek. The thick insulated door was so effective that Aegor hadn't realized someone was back there the entire time. Why is Arya still training here? Ah, right, before he left King's Landing, Leon had said he would continue keeping the Stark girl occupied. But who was she sparring with? A bad feeling crept into his gut. Suddenly he understood why he hadn't recognized anyone when he entered the office earlier. Before he could think further, a small, nimble figure darted through the doorway. Master! Arya shouted gleefully, running straight for him without even dropping the wooden training sword in her hand. Aegor barely had time to stand before she crashed into him, wrapping her arms around his waist and rubbing her head against him like a playful pup. You're finally back. No one tells stories when you're gone, and practicing swordplay all day is so boring. It's all written in books, read them yourself, and stop acting like a spoiled child. Mind your manners, girl. Helpless, Aegor ruffled Arya's hair. After 2 months apart, she seemed to have grown taller. As she pulled away, Aegor noticed something that left him stunned. Why are you wearing lipstick? Didn't you say girls should know how to dress up? Arya stuck out her tongue and muttered. I saw how nice Nina looked after putting on makeup, so I wanted to try it too. It was true, she did look good with it. Bright-eyed and full of energy, with red lips and white teeth, she had gone from the wild, troublemaker Arya to something closer to the legendary Lyanna reborn. Aegor shook off his wandering thoughts and suddenly remembered something. Arya's bodyguard usually waited outside on the bench after escorting her here. But he hadn't seen anyone when he entered. A noble girl wandering around King's Landing alone. What if she ran into trouble? Where's your guard? Aegor frowned. He could excuse Arya's carelessness, but as an adult it was his responsibility to ensure her safety. He's outside the city training the recruits, Arya said casually. After Lord Hightower drops off Lady Arya each morning, he goes to train our security forces outside the city, Nina explained, her voice much more composed now that others were present. In the evening he rushes back to escort her home to the Red Keep. He's training the recruits. Aegor raised a brow. That's good, but he's still sworn to House Stark. If you've been ordering him around, Nina quickly clarified. Lord Tyrion pays him a salary, well, hardship pay to be exact. Aegor smirked. If a Lannister was paying, it was bound to be a generous sum. As a Stark retainer, Hightower had simply found himself a well-paying side job. Aegor could already imagine the envy of the other Stark guards, watching their comrade earn extra coin while still serving his duty. His earlier concern had been unnecessary. With Tyrion in charge, there was no way anyone would be working for free. Eddard Stark, are you using my office as a free daycare? Still, Arya had contributed greatly to Night's Watch Industries. If anything, this arrangement could be considered a century's worth of prepaid trust fees. Aegor had been about to lecture her about treating cosmetics like toys, but then another thought struck him. The hand of the king's daughter is using Night's Watch products, and it actually looks good on her. Isn't that free advertisement? Perhaps he should be encouraging her instead. If the lipstick proved to be safe, he might even pay her for the promotion. Well, I'm heading to the industrial park outside the city. Want to come along? Of course, Arya cheered. She was full of boundless energy, afraid of nothing except being left alone. I want to ride my own horse. In the backyard, Arya's personal sword instructor finally stepped inside and greeted him. Lord Aegor. Yeah, Aegor nodded in response. Since returning to the office, he had heard plenty of good news, but Jaqen's continued presence wasn't a mere surprise, it was a shock. Why hadn't he left? As one of Bravo's most skilled spies and assassins, if his mission was to infiltrate the royal library and gather intelligence, why had it taken him 3 or 4 moons without completion? Aegor had reason to suspect that Jaqen's true purpose in staying had nothing to do with the library. More likely, he was here to monitor the growth of Night's Watch Industries, waiting for an opportunity to steal business secrets. If this man, one of the first employees of the office, managed to embed himself as a veteran of the company, and turn into an agent of the Iron Bank within its ranks, that would be a serious problem. And now that Tyrion had begun preparing for large-scale lending, did that mean Night's Watch Industries was now competing with the Iron Bank? Would he and Tyrion find themselves facing the threat of the Faceless Men? Nina had no idea what was running through Aegor's mind. She simply turned to the Faceless Man and instructed, "Akon, ride ahead to the industrial park and inform Lord Tyrion that Lord Aegor is coming to inspect." "Yeah." Jaqen nodded without hesitation, pushed open the door and left. Aegor watched him go, slightly taken aback. Nina can order Jaqen around. Was it because she was particularly persuasive, or was Jaqen simply too immersed in playing the role of a dedicated office worker? After a moment of thought, Aegor decided to set aside his concerns about Jaqen's presence and the Iron Bank's potential reaction. "I am the lawful overseer of the Night's Watch, its rightful leader and navigator." Since he already knew Jaqen's true identity, all he needed to do was ensure the man never entered the core management circle. If the rulers of Braavos truly wanted intelligence on the Night's Watch, getting rid of Jaqen wouldn't stop them in the slightest. As for competition, there was no competition. The Iron Bank couldn't lend money in Westeros. The policy of keeping the Iron Bank out of the Seven Kingdoms had been established as early as the Targaryen dynasty, and while the Baratheons had overthrown their predecessors, they had largely upheld their policies. Though they borrowed from the Iron Bank, they refused to allow Braavosi political and financial influence to spread within the realm. Even if Tyrion never lent out a single coin, the Iron Bank still wouldn't be able to break into this market. Westeros shut out foreign financial influence but never built its own banking institutions. Aegor shook his head. That was a failure on the part of the Iron Throne's rulers. But in their failure, they had unwittingly left behind an enormous untapped market, a perfect opportunity, as if the world itself had been waiting for someone like him, a man from another time, to come and stir up chaos. No competitors, no challengers. Finance is nothing more than a single-player game. As for the Iron Bank's stance, business is never a matter of life and death. Rather than seeking to strangle him, the rulers of Braavos would be far more likely to support and subtly assist him. As long as Aegor ensured that all core management remained under his control, then even if he died, Night's Watch Industries would not fall into enemy hands. He would never allow his opponents to seize his empire and steal the fruits of his labor. With that in mind, his personal safety was hardly at risk. The Iron Bank was powerful, at least, its reputation made it seem powerful, but at the end of the day it was still a business. And businessmen don't kill without first trying to negotiate. With that realization, Aegor felt far more at ease. Gathering his companions Nina, Arya, and Casey, who was standing outside with a smug look, he led the horses onto the road, setting off for the Night's Watch Industrial Park beyond the city walls. The weather had cooled since the peak of summer, which meant that the infamous stench of King's Landing had diminished somewhat. This difference became even more noticeable as they rode beyond the city gates, where the fresh breeze from the open plains carried away the lingering filth. They chatted as they traveled. Arya talked endlessly, filling the air with tales about how incredible Akon was. Then she boasted about how much her swordsmanship had improved and insisted she wanted to challenge her master. She even brought up the little yellow book she had hidden, how it was discovered by Septa Morden, how she had refused to admit that Tyrion gave it to her, and how she had nearly been beaten for her defiance. She sounded as if she were boasting of her loyalty, waiting to be praised. All the way, her yapping never ceased. From Arya's stories, Aegor was at least reassured about one thing: Jaqen might not be teaching her everything, but he was genuinely training her in swordplay. He found himself looking forward to seeing if she would truly become a great swordswoman in the end. Of course, that was only idle curiosity. As a man who has lived another life, who knows the plot, who understands far more than anyone else, a grown man, a teacher, and the idol of this young girl, it is my duty to protect those who admire and trust me. How ridiculous would it be to sit back and expect Arya to suffer hardships, grow into a ruthless assassin, and then protect me? Half an hour later, Aegor arrived at the Blackwater River, southwest of King's Landing, the very site he had once personally selected. After 2 months away, he was finally back online. From a distance, Aegor could see his own property. The assembly line required significant space, and its reliance on the rapids of the Blackwater River for water power dictated both its layout and location. The factory itself was a massive rectangular structure, stretching 50 or 60 meters in length, 30 or 40 meters in width, and standing 7 or 8 meters high. From afar, it looked like a colossal brick-built aqueduct spanning the river. A few thousand square meters might be unremarkable in a modern industrial zone, but here out in the wilderness beyond King's Landing, it was an imposing sight. Even Aegor, who had once guarded the wall, found it impressive, let alone the common folk of Westeros, most of whom had never seen anything of the sort. Nina had told him that the merchant investing in the second factory had made his decision on the spot after seeing this spectacle from several hundred meters away. In hindsight, it was easy to understand why. Hearing about the Night's Watch industry was one thing, but seeing its sheer scale was far more persuasive than any boast Tyrion or Nina could have made. Beyond the first operational workshop and the second one under construction, several smaller longhouses were scattered around, likely serving as living quarters. However, from this distance, their layout was unclear, so the group pressed onward. As they drew closer, Aegor noticed something else. The entire Night's Watch industrial park was enclosed by a wooden palisade taller than a man, stretching out far beyond his immediate line of sight. Gods know how much land Tyrion had claimed. The only openings in the fence served as gates, much like those of a school or a modern company, complete with doors, signage, and even a security post. Above the entrance, a row of large letters, Night's Watch Industrial, stood prominently visible even from a distance. A dozen or so people stood gathered near the gate, looking toward the road from King's Landing. Though their faces were still indistinct, the short figure among them was unmistakable. Tyrion Jakin must have arrived well ahead of Aegor. But how long had this group been standing there waiting? The gesture left Aegor feeling flattered. He and Tyrion were partners. And while Tyrion was a nobleman and had contributed more to the Night's Watch industry than anyone besides Aegor himself, the Lannister always ensured Aegor was given proper respect in public. Having such a teammate, one who was not only brilliant at business but also willing to let Aegor take credit, was an invaluable stroke of luck. With a slight kick of their horses, the four riders quickly approached the gate. Aegor, it must have been exhausting following King Robert into battle. I barely did anything, just spent 2 months idling about, and somehow I ended up making a fortune along the way. Aegor responded modestly before glancing at the industrial park. But you, Tyrion, you've transformed this place so much I hardly recognize it. He dismounted and strode toward his ever-reliable ally. Their height difference made hugging impractical, so they settled for a firm handshake and a vigorous high-five. Tyrion then turned to the assembled group and raised his voice. Listen up, everyone. This is Aegor West, the legend who has traveled the world, the chief logistics officer of the Night's Watch, the highest authority in Night's Watch industries, the boss and top leader of everyone here, including me. Don't let him walk in and go unrecognized next time. Welcome, Lord Aegor. The greeting was loud but uneven, clearly uncoordinated. Aegor smiled and waved. The last time he had inspected the papermaking workshop, he had simply enjoyed the novelty of being a leader. But now he was the true leader. For reasons beyond my control, your founder disappeared for 2 months, even though I should have been here leading you all, Aegor said. Fortunately, with Tyrion's wisdom and guidance and of course your hard work and dedication, we've achieved this much. Please allow me to thank you. It's our duty. You're too kind, Lord Aegor. Alright, let's not get too sentimental, Tyrion interrupted. We're still expanding. It's not time to pat ourselves on the back and split the profits just yet. He then began making introductions. This is Ledger, in charge of the first factory, just a workshop director. Aegor nodded, committing his face to memory. This is Enoch, head of the construction team working with the Night's Watch, the general contractor. Aegor also took note of his name and appearance. We've never had a project this big, Enoch said with a grin. Even with new hires, we're still short on hands. His words sounded like a complaint, but his expression gave him away. He was thrilled. In an era where infrastructure projects were few and far between, tradesmen like masons, carpenters, and bricklayers often spent months with no work, idling at home. Now they had constant employment with no end in sight. It was a prosperity they had never experienced before. Tyrion continued, introducing the rest of the gathered men. Soon, Aegor had met everyone present. It was a challenge to remember all their names at once, but he did his best. One thing stood out: most of them had no family names, and those who did came from minor houses Aegor had never heard of. Good. This meant the influence of great houses had not yet seeped into the Night's Watch industry, allowing it to remain a purely commercial enterprise, free from noble interference. With introductions complete, Tyrion clapped his hands together. Alright, let's show our boss around his industrial park. Inside the vast fenced area, large swaths of uneven, weed-covered land had been cleared and leveled. The roads already in use were paved with gravel, ensuring a firm surface with no risk of mud. As Aegor walked along the path, he noticed directions signposts at intersections and well-dug drainage ditches on either side of the road. These ditches connected to the Blackwater River, ensuring that even in heavy rain the industrial park wouldn't turn into a swamp. Inside the vast first factory, hundreds of workers labored tirelessly, their shouts and orders filling the air. Carts rolled in carrying raw materials, which were fed into the production line and passed through over a dozen different processes. At the far end, the pulp was extracted and loaded onto another cart to be set out to dry. Though there weren't many machines, the sheer energy of the workers made the factory feel like a place of relentless productivity. It took several days for plant fibers to be fully processed into paper, but with the efficiency of an assembly line, large sheets of raw, undried paper emerged at the end of each production line every few minutes. The factory's success was built on a fundamental economic principle: hiring free workers to mass-produce goods for a growing market. It was only at this stage that capitalism could truly take root. But Aegor knew this prosperity was only an illusion, limited to the Night's Watch industrial park. The paper mill's management and production model might have reached the cutting edge of its time, but aside from the water-powered crushing mechanism, nearly everything else still relied on manual labor. Beyond the wooden fences of the industrial park, Westeros, and the entire world of ice and fire, remained stagnant and ignorant. In a land plagued by irregular climate shifts, a long winter could still easily freeze this fragile prosperity before it had the chance to grow. Slow progress, followed by devastating collapse, then a desperate struggle to survive through the cold, only to be met with a summer of uncertain length. This hopeless cycle was why the people of this world lived without ambition, why they had no real drive to build a future. It was why Westeros had remained in a state of stagnation for thousands of years. The only way to break free is to develop fast enough during a long summer, to build something strong enough to withstand winter so that no cold can erase the progress we make. Of course, that was a concern for kings and lords. Aegor wasn't at that level yet. Winter was coming, but there was still time. It would take years for the chill of autumn to give way to the true bite of winter. His focus now was simple: seize the present and ensure that when winter comes, I survive it comfortably. By tradition, a leader was expected to speak when visiting a factory, but Aegor knew that capital was the real way to attract talent. Under Tyrion's leadership, the factory had already reached the technological frontier of this world. Aegor was no expert in the finer details of papermaking. His role was to attract business and guide the direction of Night's Watch Industries, not micromanage the work of specialists. There was no point in wasting words. No matter the era, when outsiders meddle in specialized fields and leaders issue commands based on their personal whims, all it does is create inefficiency and frustration among those actually doing the work. Aegor simply praised the workers for their enthusiasm and coordination, then signaled to move on. The same pattern repeated itself in the cutting and printing workshops. After a brief inspection, they left the main production area and made their way to the smaller buildings they had spotted earlier. He had guessed correctly. These were the living quarters for the workers. The dormitories were simple wooden houses with straw mats. The canteen was nothing more than a few large cooking pots and rows of crude wooden stools. By the standards of Westeros, these conditions were no worse than those of most peasants. But even so, Aegor couldn't help but sigh. Even Tyrion, who seemed to be a good man in every way, was still a capitalist at heart. The dormitories must be sealed against wind and rain. That's the bare minimum, Aegor told the logistics manager. When funds allow, we'll provide wooden beds. They don't have to be extravagant, but they should at least keep the workers off the ground, away from insects and dampness. And when possible, we'll establish a medical station. He then turned to the head of human resources. Wages can't be the same for everyone. We need to evaluate performance, recognize the best workers, and reward those with special skills. Retaining skilled labor is crucial. They're our most valuable asset. Write it down, Tyrion added from the side. Aegor nodded in satisfaction. All right, I've seen most of it. Overall, no, not overall. It's excellent work. Keep it up. The gathered workers and managers smiled at the praise. Now take me to see the security team's training. To outsiders, it seemed like he had recruited guards just to protect the factory. But only Aegor and perhaps Tyrion knew the truth. What he was truly building was a professional army. Making money, that didn't concern him. His subordinates could earn it however they pleased. They could make money standing, sitting, lying down, or running, so long as the coin was there when it was needed. But there was only one Night's Watch logistics and security department, and Aegor would personally oversee its rise, ensuring that it grew into exactly what he envisioned. The Knights Templar in medieval Europe expanded their assets through banking and commerce, amassing wealth that rivaled entire kingdoms. They became the biggest creditors of many kings, dukes, and earls. However, their greatest client, the King of France, ultimately turned against them, issuing a nationwide arrest warrant. They sought refuge through the Vatican's support but failed, becoming casualties of the struggle between religious and royal power. Once powerful beyond measure, they were erased from history in an instant after Black Friday. Why? Aegor summed up the reasons. 1. No stronghold of their own. After the fall of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Knights Templar became a lost cause. Despite their immense wealth, they lived under the protection of others, committing the fatal mistake of possessing treasure without sufficient power to defend it. Worse, they forgot their primary duty, ensuring the safety of pilgrimage routes, and instead prioritized financial dealings. They had no land of their own yet were wealthier than anyone else. When their protector turned against them, they had no strategic depth, no fallback, and no means to reverse their fate. 2. Lending money at high interest to those more powerful than themselves. This needs little explanation. Lending money to a stronger force is inherently risky. The Knights Templar went as far as to lend at high interest to the very ruler who sheltered them. While European kingdoms warred among themselves, the Templars merely reaped the profits, who wouldn't grow envious and resentful. When their debtor could no longer pay and began eyeing the Templars' wealth, their downfall was inevitable. 3. Lacking a sufficiently strong independent armed force. Originally a military order, the Knights Templar abandoned their martial roots after retreating from Jerusalem, shifting their focus to finance and expanding their network of contacts. They relied on the protection of the Holy See, believing themselves safe. But history proved that no matter how many allies one has or how great the supposed protection, nothing is more reliable than one's own strength. Learning from history, Aegor was determined to follow the path of the Templars in building wealth through finance, but he refused to let the Night's Watch industry suffer the same fate. To avoid that, he had to make critical adjustments while imitating them. The wall served as the natural and legal strongholds of the Night's Watch. As long as he was careful and avoided antagonizing rabid enemies like Cersei, he could act freely under the pretense of being a sworn brother. No matter what trouble he stirred up, his worst-case scenario would be retreating to Castle Black, not losing his life. But the Night's Watch and the Night's Watch industry, though sharing a name, were entirely separate. The latter provided resources and manpower to the former, yet they remained distinct forces with minimal interference between them. Aegor hoped this separation would remain permanent. Power begets ambition. Once he had only wanted to leave the Wall as a simple ranger, but now, with resources and connections, his ambitions had begun to take root. While Aegor maintained the facade of a loyal Night's Watchman, he never forgot the truth. He had no intention of remaining bound to his vows forever.
Author's note: this chapter is about foundations, not fire. While thrones shake elsewhere, real power here is poured into ledgers, labor, and long-term control. What begins as industry quietly sharpens into something far more dangerous: independence.
His future goal was to transform the Night's Watch's land into territory belonging to the Night's Watch industry. How and when he would make that transition depended on circumstances. As for reckless lending, he already had a plan. He would use the excuse that the Night's Watch must remain neutral in the politics of the Seven Kingdoms. With this justification, he could outright refuse to lend money to noble houses and the Iron Throne. By establishing this boundary from the outset, he would avoid making powerful enemies. The first 2 points were long-term strategies, but the third was something Aegor could act on immediately, strengthening his private military force under the name of the Night's Watch Logistics and Security Department. Flanked by his subordinates, Aegor arrived at the security department in the northwest corner of the industrial park. Front of a row of buildings distinct from the staff dormitories, dozens of young men in black vests sparred in pairs with training swords. 3 Stark guards oversaw them, correcting stances and stopping reckless moves, far more diligent than Sir Alizer, Castle Black's combat instructor. Of course they had to be. Unlike Sir Alizer, they weren't in a position where bad teaching went unpunished. Wait, why were there 3 Stark guards? Aegor looked closer and recognized them all. Hank, Odin, David. He called out, "Nothing important, just saying hello, carry on and thanks for your hard work." 2 of the instructors besides Hank were men Aegor had originally requested from the hand of the king when he first arrived in King's Landing. He had sent them to escort the first shipment of supplies to Eastwatch by the sea, and they hadn't returned since the Vale Rebellion. Who would have thought they'd reunite under these circumstances? Tyrion chuckled. After they delivered your goods to Eastwatch, the captain didn't want to sail back with an empty ship, so he lingered along the northern coast until he got a new delivery order for King's Landing. When they reported back and asked if they could be of further service, I had them reassigned to me. Naturally, they received their hardship pay. I see. Aegor was relieved. The hand had never specified a time limit for their assignment. He could use them as long as he needed. Tyrion had simply repurposed them to train new recruits for the Night's Watch, something even Eddard Stark wouldn't object to. But a new question arose. Why had Tyrion chosen Stark men for this role instead of Lannister soldiers? King's Landing was filled with his family's forces, 10 times the number of Starks present. Yet when hearing instructors for the Night's Watch Logistics Department, he had picked men from his enemies rather than his own house. True, Northerners were fierce warriors, but could 2 Stark guards truly be more skilled than all the knights from the other 6 kingdoms? Or was it possible that, aside from Jack and Morris, who were more like glorified babysitters, the Lannister soldiers in King's Landing only took orders from their queen and the Kingsguard prince, that they ignored their own dwarf prince entirely? Reflecting on the story so far, Aegor found it entirely plausible. Tywin had never hidden his contempt for his son. In such a household, what Lannister retainer would swear true loyalty to a son with no chance of becoming the family's heir? Whether it was true or not didn't matter. Asking would only reopen Tyrion's old wounds, so Aegor decided to let it go. He turned to Nina and asked, "There don't seem to be that many people here. Didn't they say there were nearly 100? The head of the security department, a burly man named Jellos, stepped forward and answered, "Half of them are on guard duty patrolling the factory. The other half are in training. The 2 shifts rotate, sir." "Is that so?" Aegor turned to the logistics officer. "The security team's accommodations and meals should be better than those of the regular workers. Has that been arranged?" Per Miss Nina's instructions, all accommodations are equipped with beds and bedding. "As for meals, we ensure they receive at least 1 serving of meat per day." "Good, very good." To train a competent and disciplined force, the first priority was to take care of them. The common folk in this world didn't have the ideological discipline of certain armies that could fight wars on mere rations of millet and rifles. Unless one intended to train unsullied, ensuring they were well fed, clothed, and treated better than the average laborer was the bare minimum. Without material benefits, where would a sense of honor or motivation to fight come from? Are there any other aspects to their training, or are the 3 instructors only teaching swordsmanship? "Well, not yet," Jellos admitted honestly. "I was waiting for your orders, sir." "Good, then I'll handle it. Make sure to remember. Someone once said, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Aegor agreed. Though he had no thoughts of rebellion or revolution, if one removed the words political power from the phrase, the blank could be filled with countless possibilities. In this chaotic and primitive world, the value of armed force was immeasurable. Aegor had always kept the idea of building his own army in mind, and he already had a plan. There was no need for improvisation. An army is a fighting force composed of soldiers. Organizing them into structured units makes it easier to calculate strength, command troops, and deploy them effectively. Aegor first established the structure of his security force. 10 men formed a squad, 3 squads made a platoon, 3 platoons made a company, and so on. The difference between having a structure and not having one was significant, though whether it was inherently good or bad remained to be seen. Before an army reached a certain size, the specifics, whether a squad consisted of 9 or 10 men or how many subordinate units a larger one contained, weren't overly important. As long as there was consistency and order, there was no need to overthink it. Training was the key. Keep the swordsmanship lessons, but get some bows and crossbows as well. Close combat weapons alone aren't enough, Aegor said, speaking rapidly. Add physical training and formation drills. It's not just about fighting, we need discipline and obedience as well. Bows, crossbows, formations, discipline and obedience, Jellos asked hesitantly. Sir, are you trying to train an army? Aegor stared at Jellos for a few seconds but didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Nina and asked, what's the base salary for the men in the logistics and security department? A silver stag per day, my lord. Aegor turned back to Jellos. How's that pay? Is it enough to support a family? The security chief wasn't sure what his leader was getting at, so he answered honestly, it's enough. A month's wages are about what a farmer would earn in half a year. Then I'm relieved. Aegor was willing, and at times obligated, to patiently explain things to high-ranking Night's Watch officers or nobles who might become his clients. But now he was speaking to his subordinates, and he had no intention of exhausting his mind on them. If they understood, good. If they didn't, they could leave. He had no need for fools. What gave you the impression, he continued coldly, that I'd offer a soldier's wage just to hire a bunch of glorified gatekeepers? Jellos heard the dissatisfaction in his tone. His face reddened, much like Nina's did whenever she was suddenly confronted by Aegor. I understand, sir, I will follow military standards. Good, Tyrion chose you because he believes you have some ability, don't disappoint me. The Night's Watch was, after all, a military order. Training soldiers within a military order, what could anyone say about that? Aegor had no intention of hiding it. Beyond your own military experience, I have additional things to implement. Then he introduced elements of military training he remembered from modern armies. Standing posture, formations, commands, marching techniques, and even barracks discipline. Everything had to be orderly, both in movement and in stillness. Orders were to be carried out swiftly and decisively. Work and rest schedules had to be regular. In the barracks, beds, clothing, and equipment had to be arranged uniformly. Upon seeing a superior, soldiers were expected to salute without hesitation. Even though he had simplified his explanation, Aegor still managed to leave his listeners utterly baffled. It's just a small army, why make things so complicated? Jellos barely retained any of it and immediately voiced his doubts. Sir, I understand military drills, but spending time on standing in formation, marching, arranging daily necessities, and folding blankets, does any of that actually matter? Did it matter? Aegor understood the question. Even in the modern world, people still debated whether military drills and barracks discipline were mere formalities, empty rituals with no real value. It was difficult for them to grasp that beneath the appearance of formalism, these practices reflected the level of military discipline itself. Believe it or not, under the same conditions, the army that marches in perfect formation and folds its blankets with precision will always be the stronger one, without exception in both ancient and modern times across every land and battlefield. If equipment and the quality of individual soldiers are the flesh and bones of an army, then discipline and obedience are its soul. The strength of the Unsullied comes precisely from their twisted yet unparalleled military discipline, a special case that is impossible to replicate. Aegor, however, was taking a more conventional approach. There was no doubt that transforming free men, accustomed to independent thought, comfort, and laziness, into a disciplined force that followed orders without question would be difficult. But fortunately, the Night's Watch industry was no longer short on coin. Aegor didn't bother explaining further. The superiority of modern military training methods could only be proven by results, not words. If he had to explain every command he gave, he wouldn't have time to breathe, let alone lead. I forgot to mention one thing earlier, he said. In the army I want, subordinates do not have the right to question their superiors' decisions unless a strategy meeting is being held. When I give an order, your only response should be, yes, sir, and then you carry it out to the best of your ability. This applies to everyone, including you. Do you understand? Jellos looked displeased. He stared at Aegor with a serious expression, then glanced toward Tyrion. What do you expect me to do? Tyrion snapped, glaring at him. I hired you, so I should be the one to defend you. He crossed his arms and continued, didn't you hear what I said earlier? Lord Aegor is the true master of the entire Night's Watch industry. I'm just another of his employees. Do you think I was joking? Tyrion himself had doubts about the necessity of barracks discipline training, but over time he had developed an almost blind trust in Aegor. In Aegor's eyes, Tyrion was a great teammate, but in Tyrion's eyes wasn't Aegor the same. The dwarf clasped his hands behind his back and stared coldly at Jellos. If you understand your superior's command, then carry it out. If you don't, go find Nina, collect this month's salary, and enjoy an early retirement. She's standing right here, so you won't even have to run around. You used to be an officer in the city watch, didn't you? The gold dragon you're paid each month isn't so you can stand around watching 3 instructors teach swordplay all day. The visit had been going smoothly until now. 2 senior leaders publicly confronting a subordinate in the security department had created an awkward tension. The other department heads wanted to ease the situation, but no one knew how. Jellos, as a grown man, found it hard to swallow the humiliation of being reprimanded in public. A part of him wanted to throw up his hands and say, "If someone else wants to do the job, be my guest," before walking away. But a monthly salary of 1 gold dragon and the hungry mouths waiting for him at home left no room for pride. He took a deep breath, lowered his head and said, "Yes, sir." After a brief pause, he hesitated before asking carefully, "But, Lord Aegor, I didn't quite remember everything you said. Could you write it down for me?" "No problem, some things can't be explained clearly in a single conversation. I'll put everything in order and print out the regulations. Everyone will get a copy." Though friendship between superiors and subordinates was unnecessary in the military, Aegor still gave Jellos a way out. "Try it this way first. If after a month or 2 you still think this kind of training is useless, you're welcome to come and tell me." That being said, if Jellos actually came back in a month or 2 with complaints, he might as well just leave. "That should be everything," Tyrion said. "There's another warehouse area. When the Night's Watch expands further, we can store undelivered goods and materials waiting to be sent to the wall there. Do you want to take a look? Is there anything inside? It's only half built." "What do you think? Then what's the point? We're done here." "Agreed," Tyrion smirked. "All right, it's getting late. Let's go." "Nina, take Arya out for a bit. Casey, stay here. I need a private word with Aegor." Arya scowled. "What secret can I hear?" "A conversation between men," Tyrion said with a wink before striding toward a small tower about 10 feet high in the distance. Aegor was puzzled but followed him anyway. After walking about a dozen paces, leaving everyone else behind, Tyrion pulled a small note from his pocket and handed it to Aegor. "Take a look. This is why I haven't dared return to King's Landing recently." "Haven't dared to return? Wasn't it just because you were too busy managing the Night's Watch Industrial Park?" Aegor took the note and glanced at it. His doubts vanished, replaced by a cold sweat. The note exposed Cersei and James' incestuous affair, even providing the detail that all true Baratheons had black hair while Joffrey, Tommen and Miachella were all blonde. "Where did this come from?" "Where?" Tyrion sneered. "They're everywhere in King's Landing. There are even more of them than last time when rumors spread that Lysa poisoned Jon or Rynn. You've only just returned, so you haven't had time to hear about it." Aegor felt as if he had been slapped in the face. Just moments ago, he had been issuing commands with grand ambition, meticulously planning the future of the Night's Watch industry and the logistics and security department. He was preparing to build a comfortable life for himself in this world, rising through power and wealth by following the path of the Knights Templar, dreaming of promotions, riches, and the pinnacle of success. And then in the very next moment, this news landed in his lap. Of course, it wasn't going to be that easy. This was the world of Game of Thrones, and he was standing in the heart of the storm in King's Landing. Did he really think everything would go smoothly? That the other players in this dangerous game would just step aside and allow him time to build his financial empire and raise an army in peace? Aegor had personally witnessed the devastating power of rumors. Who would have thought that someone else would adopt the very same method so quickly? Last time he had spread only a handful of notes, yet they had been enough to force the Master of Coin into exile and ignite a war that engulfed 7 kingdoms, leading to nearly 1,000 deaths. Now this new rumor was even more explosive and infinitely closer to the truth than the one he had fabricated. What kind of chaos would it unleash? Aegor didn't dare to imagine. Who was behind these notes? Littlefinger was already across the narrow sea, which meant it wasn't him. Could it be Varys? But what would Varys gain by plunging the 7 kingdoms into chaos so soon? If Westeros was already torn apart by the time the Targaryens rallied their forces for a return, wouldn't their conquest be even easier? There aren't other transmigrators causing trouble, are there? But soon Aegor realized there was an even more pressing issue than his long-term plans or his past role as a rumor-monger. "Why are you still here?" he turned to Tyrion. "Why haven't you gone back to Casterly Rock?" "I can't bear to leave. This is the first time I've found finance so interesting," the dwarf replied with a smirk. "Of course, the real reason is that Robert isn't in King's Landing. If you weren't busy dealing with the rebellion in the Vale, my most precious head would already be mounted on a spike atop the Red Keep. This is absurd. Robert is just waiting for Lysa or Rynn to come down from the Eyrie. Their food supplies are running low. He could bring that madwoman back to King's Landing at any moment. And once he returns, given the previous rumors about Jon Arryn's poisoning, if he chooses to believe the content of this note, he'll have every Lannister in King's Landing executed," Tyrion finished dryly. "You don't have to spell it out for me." He flashed a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Fortunately, I tracked down the person responsible for spreading the notes." Aegor exhaled in relief. But then an odd thought surfaced in his mind, a brothel owned by the Night's Watch. Wouldn't that make it a Night's Watch brothel? Tyrion, you really are too playful. Suppressing the urge to rub his temples, Aegor asked, and this brothel was one of Littlefinger's tools for gathering intelligence. He had hidden holes in the walls for eavesdropping and his whores doubled as spies, Tyrion explained. After I acquired it completely free of charge, mind you, I asked them to track down whoever was distributing the notes. He smirked, and wouldn't you know it. Before fleeing to Braavos, Littlefinger himself returned to the brothel and instructed his men to spread them. Littlefinger again? Aegor gritted his teeth. Damn that scheming bastard. Petter Baelish had always been cautious, so why had he been so reckless this time? Oh, right. He had left in a hurry and never planned to return. Of course he wouldn't have time to cover his tracks. A tiger left alive will always bring trouble. Aegor clenched his fists. I should have found a way to kill him. Of course that was just wishful thinking. A few months ago when he had first arrived in King's Landing, he had nothing. And even now, despite the Night's Watch industry's growing influence, how could he possibly eliminate a cunning, well-connected noble who had once lived within the walls of the Red Keep itself? Did you capture the men who spread the notes? Of course, Tyrion shrugged. Otherwise, do you really think I'd still be here instead of running for my life? He leaned against the railing, his expression contemplative. It's obvious Littlefinger wasn't behind the last batch of notes, the ones about Jon or Ryn. He must have used the same trick to strike back at someone he considered an enemy. But why Cersei and Jaime? Why target my brother and sister? Tyrion's frown deepened. My dear siblings aren't exactly known for subtlety. If they want someone dead, they'll simply kill them. They'd never resort to this kind of scheme. His logic was sound. Aegor knew it, but he had no answer. He could only offer a wry smile. In the end, people enjoy seeing the powerful brought low. Who cares how it happened? After a moment's thought, Aegor finally asked, who did you hand the captured man over to? As the younger brother of the accused, I had to avoid suspicion. Once I uncovered the truth, I passed the information to an acquaintance in the City Watch and had him lead the arrest. After capturing the suspect, they handed him over to Ed, our good and honorable hand of the king, who quickly made a public statement refuting the rumor. Unfortunately, most people refused to believe him. As they walked, approaching the small watchtower, Tyrion continued lamenting his predicament. The same kind of note appearing twice has created an illusion in the minds of the people that both incidents were orchestrated by the same person. And who is this mysterious figure? A knight of justice, a righteous hero exposing the debauchery and corruption of the powerful elite in the Red Keep, ensuring they face the punishment they deserve, Tyrion sighed. Ed refuted the rumor and declared that Littlefinger was responsible, but most people think he's just covering for the king and queen. What a mess. Justice, righteousness, who the hell has time for that? Aegor frowned. Catching the man who distributed the notes hadn't solved the problem. This was a fire that would not easily be extinguished. The Baratheon family had always been known for their black hair, yet Robert's 3 children, Joffrey, Tommen and Miechella, all had golden locks. That fact alone was like a dangerous truth hidden in plain sight, easy to overlook until someone pointed it out. But once spoken, it would spread like wildfire. Soon the people of King's Landing and beyond would whisper about it with growing fascination. Black-haired father, blonde-haired children, incest between the mother and her brother. The logic was, of course, deeply flawed, unscientific even. But the real problem was that this flawed reasoning led to the correct conclusion. Cersei, in her hatred of Robert for loving Lyanna Stark, had ensured he would never father a child with her. She timed her pregnancies carefully, calculating whether any child she carried could possibly be Robert's. The drunken king, too fond of ale and brothels, rarely shared her bed, and Cersei knew how to keep him satisfied in other ways. Over more than a decade of marriage, Robert had only managed to get her pregnant once, and she had ended that pregnancy with Moon Tea. Cersei had used timing to determine that Joffrey, Tommen and Miechella were all Jaime's children, and if she believed it, then it was almost certainly true. Even with the identity of the rumormonger revealed, neither Cersei nor Jaime could prove their innocence. If Robert or Eddard started digging deeper, they would soon find evidence, comparing the hair color of past Lannister-Baratheon marriages, for example. And that wasn't even the worst of it. The real danger lay in the fact that the people involved in this mess were all volatile. If they acted rashly, the consequences would be catastrophic. Aegor's personal ambitions were one thing, but full-blown civil war in the Seven Kingdoms, if he got caught in the crossfire, there would be no escape. Though Tyrion's short legs slowed him down, the watchtower wasn't far and soon they arrived. The structure was newly built, the contrast between fresh footprints and unstained wood still stark. Judging by the wear on the stairs, no more than a dozen people had passed through. Come upstairs, Tyrion said, stepping onto the staircase. Just listen to what I'm about to say and don't repeat it to anyone. Aegor followed as the dwarf climbed. Even though it's been proven that this rumor was Littlefinger's doing, there's still a problem. How should I put it? Tyrion paused, gripping the railing. My brother and sister have always been close. Now that I really think about it, even I find it a little unnatural. He shook his head. The truth of the note isn't the issue. The issue is whether Eddard and Robert will believe it. Aegor was silent for a moment. It's hard to say, he admitted. He had personally removed Littlefinger to prevent him from whispering this exact suspicion into Eddard's ear. But now the idea had already taken root. If the hand of the king decided to investigate on his own, Aegor exhaled slowly. He had expected trouble from Varys, not from Littlefinger, even after he was gone. "My advice," Aegor said at last, "you should return to Casterly Rock, stay out of sight for a while." "I agree," Tyrion replied, "but too much has happened in the past 2 months. The Night's Watch industry can't function without me yet. That's why I need to spend this time transferring my connections and resources to you, arranging everything properly, so that if the situation turns ugly, I can leave for Casterly Rock at a moment's notice, preparing for a storm before it arrives." Aegor could appreciate the foresight. He enjoyed having a teammate who actually knew what he was doing. But ultimately, Tyrion's life was at stake, and Aegor couldn't justify keeping him in harm's way. "It's a good plan," he conceded. "You're laying the groundwork for me. If I can't protect what we've built, I might as well go back to the wall." "Ha. My thoughts exactly," Tyrion chuckled. "But you're overthinking things. As long as you use the right people, running this operation isn't as difficult as it seems. Let's not waste words. Come on, let's reach the top and take a look at our little empire before we talk further." "Huff, why does this tower look so short yet feel so exhausting to climb?" The watchtower wasn't tall, only 4 or 5 stories, at most 20 meters high. Aegor could have ascended with ease on his own. But for a dwarf, the climb was no small feat. Several minutes passed, with Tyrion panting heavily before they finally reached the top. To the east, the blood-red comet still hung high in the sky, its fiery glow vivid against the darkening heavens. To the west, the setting sun dipped toward the horizon, casting golden light over the land. Aegor gripped the railing and gazed down. Below them, the entire Night's Watch industrial park lay spread out in full view. The watchtower was not very tall, but fortunately the surrounding terrain was flat, and there were no taller buildings nearby, leaving their line of sight mostly unobstructed. Even from here, the far end of the fence stretching westward appeared blurry, barely visible as a faint line. "How much land did you enclose?" "As much as the hand of the king approved, until people start living there. You can't just fence off someone's home," Tyrion shrugged. "The area already enclosed is probably the size of 5 or 6 red keeps. Don't underestimate it. If all goes well, it still might not be enough." Aegor glanced around before looking at the first factory, which had already begun operations. If the buildings didn't require partitions, he reckoned dozens of factories of similar size could fit within the enclosed area. Tyrion continued, "When the armies of the 6 kingdoms gathered at the Bloody Gate recently, book sales hit their peak. Workers toiled from dawn until dusk, yet they still couldn't keep up with the rising demand."
Author's note: this chapter is where order tightens and chaos answers. While Aegor builds structure, discipline, and safeguards against the future, the realm responds with whispers sharp enough to cut kings. Here, armies are trained in daylight, rumors march in the dark, and Aegor learns the hardest truth of power. You can plan perfectly and still be dragged into the storm.
Now that the war has ended, the growth rate of orders has begun to slow. Once the second factory is built, the pressure on papermaking and book printing will ease considerably. The nobles and soldiers who took part in quelling the rebellion in the Vale also saw the books we printed. When they return home with the cheap books they purchased in the barracks, shrewd merchants will soon seek us out to buy books in bulk for resale beyond the royal domain. I've considered that issue, but long-distance transport costs are too high. It won't become our primary sales channel. The dwarf, too short to lean over the railing comfortably, draped himself against it instead. He pointed toward a plot of land on the riverside west of the factory under construction. Once the investment is secured, the last papermaking and printing facility will be built there, and then this industry will be complete. I've calculated that even factoring in the external sales you mentioned, 3 factories will be sufficient. Any further expansion will require tapping into the markets of the other 7 kingdoms. Indeed, the market was reaching its limit. In this era of low productivity, the wealth gap was not as extreme. Aside from the noble lords, most people had little money. Even if the cost of paper decreased and book prices dropped, the majority still couldn't afford them. Literacy rates among the poor were even lower. The Night's Watch industry couldn't actively lower prices just to attract customers who seemed numerous but mostly wouldn't buy anything. If we want to expand, our only option is to partner with the great houses of the 7 kingdoms. We provide the technology, manpower, and initial funds while they offer us access and trade privileges. Aegor nodded, though his expression was troubled. But I fear these nobles will covet the profits and refuse to cooperate. Instead, they'll try to seize the technology and go at it alone. Leaving everything else aside, Lady Margaery of House Tyrell has already tried to pry information about papermaking and printing from me. Really? I recall she's just a young girl about Nina's age, yet she already has such ambitions. If that's the case, there's little we can do. We're not the only ones with intelligence, and papermaking and printing aren't exactly complex. You can't expect to monopolize this forever. That's why I established entrepreneurial loans and invested in new inventions. Tyrion gestured toward another section of land. Look, the fenced area has been leveled. You and I have the final say on how to use it. That row of vacant lots along the river will be reserved for industries requiring water power, while the ones farther inland are yours to decide. Right now, there aren't enough workers in the industrial park to attract merchants and vendors, but after another phase of development we can persuade some laborers to move their families here, settling within our perimeter. The situation will change soon. Aegor was startled by Tyrion's vision. Are you planning to turn this into a satellite town of King's Landing? Why not? Have you seen how many people live outside the city walls of King's Landing? They're a ready supply of cheap labor. Once they get steady jobs and wages, they'll quickly form a new class, one far wealthier than ordinary farmers. Why shouldn't we profit from their gold dragons and silver stags? Tyrion withdrew his hand and continued, of course this is just an ideal plan. Reality will never go so smoothly. We'll have to adapt as things unfold. For now, I want to discuss people with you. Aegor nodded. The people Tyrion had introduced earlier were just ordinary individuals by modern standards, but in this world, which was worse than worse, they were more than qualified to be grassroots leaders. As for promotions, their abilities would be assessed accordingly. That Jellos we just confronted, he was once a gold cloak officer. He left the city watch due to his frustration with its corruption. I recruited him through an acquaintance, spoke with him for a while and got to know him a bit. He may not be as sharp as you, but he's skilled enough to manage a team of dozens. No need to sing his praises. Do I seem like a petty man? Just bringing it up for your awareness. I recruit workers randomly, as long as they can do the job, but when it comes to management, I'd rather leave a position vacant than settle for someone incompetent. Rest assured, anyone I introduce to you is trustworthy. Tyrion leaned against the railing, looking down from the watchtower at the ground more than 100 feet below. Since the Night's Watch disbandment was announced, more than a dozen minor leaders had left, leaving only Arya, Nina and Casey waiting for the two main leaders to finish their conversation. The two girls, one older, one younger, were chatting animatedly while Casey, Aegor's young follower, stood solemnly a few paces away. Aegor, what do you think of that girl, Nina? Aegor had expected Tyrion to continue discussing other grassroots leaders. Why mention her? I was about to ask you the same. Why did you assign her to my office instead of keeping her in the workshop working on processes? When you left, I took over your role and I realized I needed an assistant, so I had her help me for a couple of days. After working with her, I found she picked things up incredibly fast, so I decided to train her. Her brother is more than capable of leading the workers in refining production, so I took her as my apprentice. She worked in the office for a while and her performance exceeded my expectations. When the Forge Note incident happened, I was so spooked I fled the city, yet she handled everything independently. And you're still not convinced? You took her as your apprentice. What, you can take a female apprentice but I can't? Tyrion rolled his eyes at Aegor's questioning tone. It's no exaggeration, she's smarter than anyone in the Night's Watch except for you and me. If not for being a woman, she'd be recognized for what she is, a rare gem in a pile of gravel. Aegor hadn't realized Nina was this capable, but Tyrion had risked his life by staying in King's Landing to support the Night's Watch. Arguing with him felt unnecessary. An office manager needs more than literacy, accounting skills, and intelligence. They have to handle visitors. She blushes and stammers just talking to me. How will she deal with outsiders? Blushes and stammers. Tyrion looked surprised. She was never like that with me. She's cheerful, assertive, and meticulous, utterly intolerant of mistakes. When she gets angry, she even dares to talk back to me. Ask any of the new office staff, every single one of them both respects and fears her. Tyrion was fond of joking, but he never lied. Aegor stroked his chin. Had he startled her with his sudden return? But if she lacked the composure for this, how had she earned such high praise? Tusk. The answer's obvious. You're her weakness. She turns foolish around you. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that she's faking it. Tyrion studied Aegor for a moment. She likes you. Don't tell me you haven't noticed. While you were in the Vale, she asked me every day when you'd be back. And earlier during your lecture, you didn't notice the way she was secretly watching you. Her eyes were full of stars and tenderness. So what are you going to do about it? Keep stringing her along for amusement? That's dull, isn't it? Doesn't it make you sad? It was disheartening, but I held it in with self-control. Aegor shrugged. That's not what I meant. It's just that subordinates are subordinates and women are women. If the relationship becomes entangled, it could cause trouble. Is that really a conflict? I'm a straightforward man. I'm good at seducing women but terrible at matchmaking. I won't beat around the bush with you, I'll be blunt. My apprentice likes you, and as her mentor I hope you can acknowledge that. There's a lot of selfishness in this, but also some serious considerations. Tyrion spread his hands and got to the point. If I were to return to Casterly Rock today, Nina is the only one who could somewhat fill my role in the Night's Watch and help ease your burdens. We've expanded too quickly, and our personnel structure has weaknesses. The biggest issue is the lack of strong middle and senior management. Men sometimes stay loyal to a person or a cause out of belief or sworn oaths. But women want their emotions reciprocated. Right now she likes you and goes to great lengths to meet your expectations, but that passion won't last forever. And there's something else you can't ignore. I don't know what the customs of marriage are in your homeland, but in Westeros, once a woman weds, her priority shifts to bearing children, raising them, and serving the interests of her husband and his family. Do you understand? I see, you should have just said so earlier. Aegor suddenly realized what Tyrion was implying. He was warning him not to assume that Nina was a fully devoted subordinate. He couldn't be overly confident in relying on her, as a woman like her could be claimed at any time. I imagine you see yourself as a member of the Night's Watch, but I must remind you, Nina still likes you despite knowing you belong to the Watch. Tyrion rolled his eyes. A commoner girl like her never had a chance to marry into a noble family. But now, she was part of the Night's Watch industry from the very beginning. Her knowledge and experience have grown tremendously. Do you think she'd still be content to marry an ordinary man? Tyrion had thought that after uncovering the source of the rumors, he'd be able to relax for a while. But Aegor knew that Eddard Stark might already be investigating the lineage of the princes. The thought weighed on him like a massive stone, making it hard to breathe. How could he spare time to worry about a girl's affections? The little lion failed to notice Aegor's unease and continued rambling. Either find someone capable enough to replace my apprentice soon or make her yours quickly. The longer you hesitate, the worse it will be. Nina is too beautiful when she's properly dressed, which isn't entirely a good thing for a common girl like her. You need to keep an eye on her. King's Landing isn't as safe as it seems. Aegor sighed. I get it, I know what to do, you don't need to worry. Of course I trust you. Tyrion let out a helpless sigh. Enough about this, let's talk about your trip to the Vale. Besides Margaery Tyrell trying to fish for business secrets, was there anything else worth mentioning? The two leaned against the railing, chatting for a while as Aegor recounted his experiences in the coalition camp over the past 2 months. He started with Robert's assault on the Bloody Gate. Naturally, he also mentioned the large-scale matchmaking event among the nobles of the Six Kingdoms. To secure dozens of investment prospects, he had to make the right connections and ensure every department was prepared for the necessary receptions. He had offered some advice to Robert, and thanks to Sir Blackfish, he had inadvertently made a significant contribution, earning himself 2 rewards of his choice, both of which he had kept as a surprise for later. Still, it was a minor achievement, barely worth mentioning compared to what Tyrion had accomplished. Tax-free? After being stunned several times that day, Aegor finally managed to shock his companion for once. Upon hearing the news, Tyrion displayed an unprecedented look of disbelief, remaining silent for a long while before finally speaking. Robert, is he mad? If he had come here in person, he probably wouldn't have made such a reckless decision. But what's done is done. Aegor smiled. Regardless of anything else, just saving 1/20th of the trade tax is no small amount. Yes, no small amount indeed. You have any idea how much effort I put into building a relationship with Ead's newly appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer? I went out of my way to entertain a whole group of tax officials, dinners, drinks, whores, everything, just to get on their good side. And now all that effort was for nothing. He had meticulously laid the groundwork, forming connections and preparing every means possible to reduce tax burdens, only for the Night's Watch industry to suddenly be declared tax-exempt. The unexpected turn of events left him both thrilled and incredulous. If you're so unhappy about it, we can always keep paying taxes, Aegor shrugged. Robert's not going to give us a refund. If you're still not happy, then I'll never be happy, Tyrion shot back, making an obscene gesture. I'm convinced, when it comes to flattery, you truly are the best in Westeros. Now my tax officer has no work left to do. Send him to you in the city tomorrow, train him to be a receptionist. When your clients come, handle the important ones yourself. Have Nina take care of the big fish and let the smaller ones be dealt with by the lower employees. You may not be a noble, but you're a well-known figure now, don't undervalue yourself. All right, as you say, though I think we'll need more than one receptionist, so we'll have to hire additional staff. That's your decision. Our assets far exceed our liabilities. In your words, our capital chain is quite stable, so we can afford to take bold steps. Tyrion finished speaking and turned his gaze westward. His face, never particularly handsome, was now filled with an ambition that belied his small stature. The sun had already touched the horizon, its brilliant light fading into warm orange-red hues, casting a golden glow over their faces. Though the sun was setting, Tyrion's spirits soared. He was about to invite Aegor to stay the night, to drink, feast, and continue planning their future, but just as the words reached his lips, he suddenly remembered something. 7 hells, Arya has to be back at the Red Keep before dark or she won't be allowed into the city. You should take her back now, we'll talk later. Oh, and you'll love your new place. A new place? Aegor raised an eyebrow. He had almost forgotten about that. Arya's parents were not the type to take such matters lightly. Even though some money had exchanged hands, leaving their youngest daughter outside the city overnight without warning, that was asking for trouble. It was time to head back. All right, see you later. The two descended the watchtower and parted ways. Aegor, accompanied by 2 women and 1 man, exited through the gates where they met Haer, who was waiting for his lady. Under the last rays of sunset, they began their journey back to King's Landing. What were you and Tyrion talking about? Arya asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. What took so long? We were discussing whether to open a brothel in the industrial park. Interested. You could invest some of your pocket money, we'll give you dividends like always. If you don't want to tell me, just say so. Stop joking like Tyrion, you always treat me like a child, don't you understand? The girl huffed in frustration. Then her expression shifted as she leaned in eagerly. Did anything interesting happen while you were in the Vale putting down the rebellion? Tell me, sharp as ever. And truthfully, there were quite a few entertaining stories. In fact, she was about to learn something before any other Stark, aside from the one involved. You have a sister-in-law now, her name is Rosalind Frey. Well, now she's Rosalind Stark, but you probably won't see her for a while. Robb chose her himself and sought the king's approval for the marriage. Afraid of your father's reaction, he took his new wife straight back to Winterfell. Robb got married, he picked his own wife and even got the king's blessing. 7 hells, Arya practically vibrated with excitement. For the first time in her life, she felt genuine admiration for her elder brother. She didn't care about the Frey's reputation or their status as upstarts, she was simply overjoyed. How old is she? What does she look like? Does she like riding and archery? She's about 15 or 16. As for her looks, she's considered quite beautiful. As for her interests, you'll have to ask her yourself when you meet her. How did she and Rob meet? Who courted whom? Did you see them kiss? Wait, you said they've already shared a bed. Was there any argument before that? How did it happen? Were you involved? Tell me everything. All right, stop. After enduring a rapid-fire barrage of questions, Aegor finally had to put a stop to it. That's all I know. It's not like I married your sister-in-law myself. Before Arya could protest, Aegor quickly turned to the other woman in their group. Nina, back on the watchtower, your master praised you for your intelligence. I have some tasks for you. Let's see if you truly live up to his expectations. By now the girl had composed herself. She blinked twice, lowered her gaze slightly to avoid Aegor's, but didn't blush or stammer as before. Please give me your orders, sir. Oversee the dormitory bed frames and the medical facilities I mentioned earlier. Make sure they're implemented as soon as possible. Also, find someone literate and good with numbers to teach the young men in the Night's Watch security team. I'll cover the costs. The lessons will be during training breaks, free but voluntary. Let them know in advance. Future officers in the Night's Watch logistics department, squad leaders and above, must be able to read and count. Understood. Casey, you have a task as well. Before Arya could interrupt, Aegor turned to his squire. In King's Landing, you won't need to follow me around every day. Starting tomorrow, you'll train with the Night's Watch security team. I'll draft regulations for the logistics direct armed forces soon. You'll be the first inspector responsible for overseeing training, maintaining discipline, and ensuring my rules are enforced. Report directly to me. Inspector, I report directly to you. Casey's eyes lit up. So I don't have to answer to anyone else. Exactly. Warn those who ignore the rules, then reprimand them. If that doesn't work, dock their pay. If they still refuse to comply or dare to defy orders, dismiss them. Aegor smirked. The more the soldiers hate you, the better you're doing your job, and if you need help, recruit 1 or 2 assistants but no thugs. Whatever rules apply to the men apply to you as well. Lead by example and no one will complain. Casey grinned. Got it. After setting his affairs in order, Aegor finally turned back to Arya. So, Arya, how has your father been these past 2 months? Has the hand of the king been keeping busy? He never stops. Jory says the king's arse is too dirty, and no matter how hard my father scrubs, it won't get clean. The girl pouted, then snickered at the image she had conjured. Let him be busy. I'd rather practice swordplay with Akon. There was nothing useful to be gleaned from Arya's response. It was only natural for the hand of the king to be busy. Who knew whether he was investigating the rumors about the Lannister twins? Asking outright, what has the hand been busy with lately, would be far too suspicious. Even if Arya didn't think much of it, her bodyguard was still present. Better to have the Night's Watch brothel spies keep a close eye on things. Since they were now in place, they had to be put to good use. Hey, did you eavesdrop when Rob and my sister-in-law entered the bridal chamber? Come on, just tell me a little, master, please. This was bad. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing that Arya and Tyrion got along well, but children were easily influenced. The dwarf's irreverence seemed to have imparted an overly free-spirited view on certain matters. This was really Aegor frowned. Alright, what kind of girl chases after people asking questions like that? Is that ladylike behavior? 7 hells with being a lady, Arya grumbled, sounding exactly like Tyrion. Fortunately, Aegor was relieved and even a little proud that despite being gone for 2 months, his authority over his students still held. After receiving 2 stern glares, Arya pursed her lips so tightly that a bottle of wildfire could have been hung from them, but she finally fell silent. No one disturbed his thoughts after that. Sitting astride his horse, Aegor calmed himself and considered how to stop Eddard Stark from investigating the Lannister twins scandal. Unfortunately, after a thorough mental exercise, the conclusion he reached was almost impossible. Within the Night's Watch Industrial Park, he was the founder, the leader, the ultimate authority. Everyone showed him respect and none dared to disobey. But in King's Landing, who was he there? A Night's Watchman. A Night's Watchman who happened to do business. Even though he had been received by both the Hand and the King, had secured tax exemptions, and was running a thriving operation, so what? He was still a man who wasn't even qualified to sit at the game table in the grand contest for the Iron Throne. Not to mention stopping Eddard Stark from pursuing the truth of the rumors. Logic dictated that it would be best for him to stay as far away from this matter as possible. Whether as an enemy or an ally of Cersei, he could easily find himself in deep trouble. Lost in these thoughts, they soon approached the King's Gate. Beyond this city wall, the powerful figure of the Night's Watch Industrial Park would become merely the head of the Night's Watch office in King's Landing. Under the shadow of the Iron Throne, they had neither the standing nor the power to be arrogant. The gate was half closed, offering a brief final chance for all manner of latecomers to slip through before it was shut for the night. The gold-cloaked standing guard didn't recognize Arya, but they did recognize Hale, the Stark retainer who frequently passed through. That alone was enough for them to allow the group entry without questions or delay. The sun had already set. Once inside the city, Aegor learned more about recent developments at the office from Nina's briefing. The employee Aegor had personally recruited, the one who had joined at the same time as Casey, had not resigned and left, as Aegor had initially assumed. Instead, he had taken charge of a second Night's Watch office. Operating out of a small shop in the western district of King's Landing, this branch independently handled labor recruitment for the Night's Watch enterprises. Thanks to this, residents on the west side of the city no longer had to cross most of King's Landing to the garrison's eastern camp in search of job opportunities. Since it was already late, there was no need to make a detour to check on the new chain store, which was likely closed for the night anyway. After Nina pointed out its location, they continued eastward until their path no longer aligned with Arya's route back to the Red Keep. "Hale, I lost track of the time today and delayed Arya's return. I'd appreciate it if you could get her back to the Red Keep as soon as possible. If she's late for Lord Stark's family supper, please apologize on my behalf and make it clear that it wasn't Arya's fault. Thank you. There's no need to thank me. This is the duty Lord Stark entrusted to me. If anything goes wrong, the responsibility is mine. Well, my father won't be mad if I'm just a little late, but hurry up, I'm starving." As she was led away, Arya turned back when she was barely 10 paces away and shouted, "Master, I'm challenging you tomorrow, don't forget." Aegor grinned. He didn't believe for a second that a girl who had only been learning swordplay for 2 months could defeat a Night's Watch ranger with real combat experience. "All right, sleep well tonight. Let's see if you can surprise me tomorrow." Nina then led Aegor and Casey through several winding streets, eventually stopping before a mansion in the Eastern District. With their funds growing and their workforce expanding, it had become both impractical and expensive for the Night's Watch office staff to keep lodging in inns. Thus, Tyrion had rented this residence from a friend, providing a place for the office's core personnel and managers to live.
Author's note: this chapter is about growth pains and quiet fault lines. As industry expands and systems mature, power shifts from vision to management, from inspiration to responsibility. Amid ledgers, factories, and careful planning, personal bonds emerge as the most unpredictable variable of all. This chapter ends here, but the nation endures. More worlds and legends await on Fanfic Nation, where imagination rules and every story begins with a choice. Subscribe and return for the next legend.